I never used to be afraid of being alone. The long winter nights were peaceful, almost comforting, especially when snow blanketed the streets in an eerie silence. But that changed on one particular night when I realized that being alone doesn't always mean you're truly alone. It started with something small, something I brushed off at first. I was home alone for the weekend, house sitting, while my parents visited relatives. The snowstorm had rolled in fast, covering everything in thick white sheets. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. But inside, the house was warm, quiet, safe, or so I thought. I was watching a movie when I heard the first noise, a soft, deliberate crunching of snow outside. Not the wind, not an animal. Footsteps. Pausing the movie, I listened, my breath held tight in my chest. The sound stopped, replaced by a heavy silence. I crept toward the window, peering through the frost-covered glass. The streetlights cast long shadows, and the snow was untouched except for a single trail of footprints leading toward my front door. My stomach tightened. I checked the door. Locked. Still, an unease settled in. I told myself it was nothing, maybe some kid messing around in the snow. I tried to shake it off, but something about those footprints nagged at me. They started at the street but never led away. A few hours passed. I distracted myself with my phone, pushing away the paranoia, convincing myself I was being ridiculous. Then, just as I started to relax, something made my skin crawl. A door creaked open. Not the front door, not the back. A door inside the house. The hair on my arm stood on end. My breathing shallowed. I turned toward the hallway where the sound had come from. A single door stood slightly ajar. The guest's bedroom. I knew that door had been shut. I remembered locking it earlier because it always swung open on its own, and it creeped me out. But now, it was open. Not wide. Just enough to reveal the dark space beyond. I hesitated, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it. I took a step closer, reaching for the switch. The moment the light flickered on, my breath caught in my throat. There were wet footprints leading out of the room. They trailed from the guest bed to the door, melting, fresh. I backed away, gripping my phone, hands shaking. My mind raced for a rational explanation. Maybe I'd walked in there earlier and forgotten. Maybe the snow had melted off my own shoes. But I knew, deep down, I hadn't been in that room. I forced myself to check the house, opening every door, looking in every corner. Nothing. No signs of forced entry. No hiding places left unchecked. And yet, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Then, the whispers started. At first they were subtle, almost like the wind seeping through cracks in the walls. But soon they became unmistakable. A soft, breathy voice drifting from the hallway, calling my name. I barely breathed. My fingers were ice cold around my phone as I opened it, trying to call someone, anyone. The signal was dead. A soft tapping came from the window. I turned slowly, heart in my throat. My breath fogged the glass as I stared outside. At first, I saw nothing but the swirling snow, but then a shadow emerged from the darkness. A tall, gaunt figure standing just beyond the light. No face, no features, just a presence, watching. I stumbled back, a strangled gasp escaping my throat. My mind screamed to run, to do something. But before I could move, the lights in the house flickered violently. A sudden blast of cold air surged through the room as the front door slammed open on its own. The warmth in the house vanished, replaced by something unnatural, something wrong. My breath turned to mist in the air as an invisible weight pressed against my chest. The whispers were all around me now, too close. I bolted. Slamming the door shut, I locked myself in my room, shoving my dresser against it. My fingers trembled as I turned on my phone's flashlight, sweeping it across the space. The room was empty, but my reflection in the mirror wasn't right. I froze. My reflection stood there, staring at me, but something was off. It wasn't mirroring my movement. It just stood still, watching. Then, it smiled. I wasn't smiling. The realization hit like ice water in my veins. My knees nearly buckled as the light in my room flickered again, casting shadows across the walls. I turned away from the mirror, my mind spiraling. I needed to get out. I needed to leave. But before I could move, my phone vibrated in my hand, a text from my own number. My stomach churned as I slowly raised the screen to my face. The message was simple. You let me in. The light went out, and the last thing I remember was the feeling of cold breath on my neck. I never liked being home alone during the winter. There was something about the way the snow swallowed sound, making everything feel too still, too quiet, like the world outside had disappeared, leaving me trapped in some empty, forgotten place. But that night, the silence wasn't empty. It was watching. The storm had rolled in early, thick snow piling against the windows. My parents were out of town for a few days, and I had the house to myself. At first, I didn't mind. I wrapped myself in a blanket, watched a few movies, scrolled through my phone, the usual. But then, at around midnight, I noticed something strange. The back door was unlocked. I was sure I had locked it earlier, positive. I even remembered double checking it before settling in for the Yet, there it was, just slightly open, a thin sliver of darkness visible between the frame. Cold air seeped in, carrying the faintest scent of something rotting. A chill ran down my spine. My first thought was that maybe I had forgotten. Maybe I hadn't checked as carefully as I thought. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Swallowing the lump in my throat, I closed the door and locked it. I even tested the handle a few times, making sure it was secure. Then, just to be safe, I checked all the other doors and windows. Everything else was fine, secure. But the unease lingered. I tried to go back to watching my movie, but I couldn't focus. Every small noise, the wind against the house, the creak of the floorboards, felt too loud, too intentional. My paranoia started to get the best of me. I told myself it was nothing, just my mind playing tricks. And then I saw it, from the corner of my eye, just beyond the glow of the TV screen, a figure, standing in the hallway. My blood went cold. I turned my head quickly, heart hammering against my ribs. But the hallway was empty. I stared for what felt like forever, my breathing shallow. The darkness beyond the living room stretched endlessly, shadows shifting as the TV flickered. Had I imagined it? I didn't know. But suddenly, I didn't feel safe anymore. Deciding I was just tired, I forced myself to shake it off. I turned off the TV, locked my bedroom door, and climbed into bed. I kept my phone close, but exhaustion eventually won, and I drifted. Then, at 3:12 a.m., I woke up to the sound of whispering. It was faint, distant, but definitely inside the house. My heart pounded. I held my breath, listening. It was coming from the hallway, soft, hushed voices. But they weren't normal whispers. They sounded wrong, like they were being spoken in reverse, words stretched and twisted. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to stay calm. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe I had left the TV on by mistake. Maybe the whispering stopped. The silence that followed was so complete, so heavy, it felt like the air had been sucked from the room. And then slowly, my doorknob started to turn. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The knob twisted back and forth as if someone was testing the lock. I sat frozen, every muscle locked in terror. I wanted to reach for my phone, call someone, do anything, but I was too afraid to make a sound. Then, after what felt like forever, the knob stopped turning. Silence. I stayed that way, gripping the blankets so tightly my fingers ached. The only sound in the room was the ragged beat of my own pulse. And then, my phone vibrated. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Hands shaking, I picked it up, the screen casting a faint glow in the darkness. A new message from an unknown number. I hesitated, dread settling like lead in my stomach. Then, slowly, I opened it. "Why did you lock the door?" My entire body turned to ice. I stared at the message, every nerve screaming for me to run, to get out of the house, but I couldn't move. Then, before I could react, another message, a picture. My breath hitched as I tapped to open it. It was dark and grainy, but I recognized it instantly. It was a photo of my bedroom door, taken from the hallway. I scrambled out of bed, heart hammering, chest tight with fear. I pressed myself against the wall, listening, trying to hear anything beyond the door. Nothing. The hallway was silent. I couldn't stay here. I had to get out. Slowly, carefully, I crept toward the window, trying not to make a sound. I unlocked it, shivering as the freezing air hit my skin. Then, just as I started to climb out, the closet door creaked open behind me. A sharp, raspy breath filled the room. I didn't look. I just jumped. The cold night air burned my lungs as I ran, slipping on the ice, barely able to see through the blinding snow. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I ran until my legs gave out, until I reached my neighbor's house and pounded on their door. They found me standing there in my pajamas, shaking and incoherent. The police searched my house, but no one was there. Nothing was missing. No signs of forced entry. But the back door? It was unlocked again. And on the frost-covered glass of my bedroom window, there was a single handprint. Not mine. I grew up in a small town where winters were long and brutal. Snowstorms could trap you inside for days, and the roads would disappear under thick blankets of ice. That winter, I was staying alone at my uncle's cabin while he was away on a trip. It was supposed to be a peaceful getaway, just me, the snow, and complete solitude. But on the second night, I realized I wasn't alone. It started with the footprints. I had gone outside that evening to bring in more firewood. The storm picked up. The sky was dark, heavy with swirling flakes, and the wind howled through the trees. As I turned back toward the cabin, I noticed something strange in the snow. Footprints, but they weren't mine. A single set of tracks started from the middle of the yard, leading straight to the cabin. They weren't deep, meaning whoever made them had arrived recently. I spun around, searching the darkness. No one was there. No distant figures, no movement. Nothing but the whispering snow and skeletal trees. My heart pounded. The fresh prints meant that someone had been here within the last few minutes. But the part that made my stomach twist? There were no footprints leading away. Whoever or whatever had walked up to the cabin hadn't left. A deep sense of unease crawled up my spine. I forced myself to move, stepping carefully over the prints as I hurried inside. The moment I shut the door, I locked it. Then I checked all the windows, one by one, secure. I tried to shake the fear, telling myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe the wind had covered the exit tracks. Maybe I just hadn't looked hard enough. But later that night, I knew for sure I wasn't alone. It was past midnight when I woke up. At first, I wasn't sure why. Then, through the deep silence of the cabin, I heard it, a soft shuffling coming from the hallway. I lay frozen, my breath caught in my throat. The sound was faint but unmistakable. Slow, careful footsteps, as if someone was trying not to be heard. I reached for my phone, fumbling to turn on the flashlight. My fingers shook as I swiped at the screen. But the moment the beam of light hit the hallway, the noise stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating. I sat up slowly, scanning the narrow hallway outside my door. Nothing. No movement, no shadowy figure, just the empty cabin, dark and silent as ever. But the air felt different, heavy, charged. I told myself it was my imagination. The storm outside was making the house creak. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Then, just as I was about to turn off the light and try to sleep, a knock. My body locked up. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was soft, deliberate, and it was coming from inside the closet. A cold wave of terror crashed over me. I stared at the door, my heart hammering in my chest. I wanted to run, wanted to scream, but I couldn't move. Then, in the silence that followed, I heard something even worse, a whisper, right outside my bedroom door. It was too quiet to make out the words, but the voice was wrong, raspy, hollow, like breath against frozen glass. Then, ever so slowly, the doorknob began to turn. My paralysis shattered. I lunged for my phone, my hands shaking so violently I almost dropped it. The screen glowed as I fumbled to call anyone who could help. But before I could dial, my phone buzzed. A new message from an unknown number. I hesitated, terror coiling in my stomach, and opened it. It was a picture, a photo of me, taken from inside the closet. I barely had time to react before the closet door burst open. I don't remember much after that. Just a blur of cold air, a figure moving too fast to see clearly, and a sickening wave of wrongness. I must have blacked out, because when I woke up, it was morning. The storm had passed. Sunlight streamed through the frosted windows. The cabin was empty. I checked my phone. The message, the photo, gone, as if they had never been there. But I knew what I saw, and when I went outside, my blood ran cold. The footprints from last night, they were still there, but now a second set led from the cabin back into the woods. I never minded being home alone. My parents worked late shifts, and I had spent countless nights by myself. It never felt scary before, but that night was different. Winter had settled in thick and merciless, covering the ground in an endless white sheet. The roads were nearly impossible to drive on, and the wind howled through the trees like some unseen predator. I had locked up early, knowing no one would be coming home until morning. Around 11 p.m., I was curled up on the couch watching a movie when I heard something, a knock at the door. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. No one was supposed to come over. No one should have even been out in this weather. Slowly, I muted the TV. The knock came again. 3 short, deliberate raps. Tap, tap, tap. A wave of unease crawled up my spine. I hesitated, then got up and crept toward the peephole. The porch light was on, illuminating a blanket of freshly fallen snow. But there was no one there. I stared at the empty doorstep, confusion swirling in my mind. Had I imagined it? The knock had been real. I was sure of it. My breath fogged up against the cold door as I hesitated, waiting. Silence. I shook my head and stepped back. Maybe the wind had knocked a branch against the house. Maybe I was just jumpy. I turned to walk away, and then my phone buzzed. I nearly jumped out of my skin. With shaking hands, I pulled it from my pocket. A text message. Unknown number. Why didn't you answer? I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, trying to process what I was seeing. Who was this? How did they know I hadn't answered? I swallowed hard and typed back, "Who is this?" No response. I told myself it was a prank, maybe a wrong number, maybe one of my friends messing with me. I locked the phone and tossed it onto the couch. I tried to ignore the unease settling in my chest. But then, the knock came again, louder this time, more insistent. I turned back to the door, my breath catching. The air inside suddenly felt colder, like the warmth was being pulled away. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Then, my phone buzzed again. I forced myself to glance down. Another message. This one had just a picture. I felt sick as I opened it. The image was grainy, dimly lit by the porch light. It was taken from the perspective of someone standing just outside the door, someone looking through the peephole. A chill of pure, undiluted terror washed over me. I spun around, eyes darting back to the peephole. But when I looked, there was still no one there. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. I grabbed my phone, my fingers shaking as I typed, "Who are you?" 3 dots appeared. They were typing. A response popped up. "Let me in." I backed away from the door. Number no, no, no. My hands were slick with sweat as I scrambled for the locks, double-checking them. I grabbed a kitchen knife, my breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. And then I heard it, the sound that still haunts me to this day, a whisper, not from the door, from behind me. I'm already inside. The lights flickered. The cold in the room deepened, and then everything went black. When I woke up, the sun was right. My phone lay on the floor, the screen cracked, the front door was still locked. The windows were shut, but something was different. The rug by the couch was wet, soaked with melted snow. And on the fogged-up glass of the living room window, written in shaky, uneven letters, was a message. "Next time, don't make me knock." I was 16 the winter my parents left me home alone for the week. They had gone to visit my grandmother in another state, and since I had school on Monday, I stayed behind. It wasn't a big deal. I had been home alone plenty of times before, but that weekend changed everything. It started with a snowstorm. By the second night, the wind was howling so loudly that it sounded like something was screaming outside. The snow piled high against the windows, and the power had flickered once or twice, making the house feel even more isolated. I had locked all the doors, double-checked the windows, and settled onto the couch with a blanket and some snacks. I told myself there was nothing to be afraid of, until the doorbell rang. I nearly dropped my drink. My stomach twisted as I glanced at the clock. 1:13 a.m. No one should have been outside, and I hesitated before slowly getting up and creeping to the front door. The porch light was on, casting long shadows over the snow. I peered through the peephole. Nobody was there. A shiver ran. Maybe the wind had rattled something? Maybe the storm had messed with the wiring? I waited a moment longer, then turned away. And then my phone buzzed. I grabbed it from the table. A text message. Unknown. Number, "I see you." I stared at the screen, my breath catching in my throat. Who the hell was this? Slowly, I turned back toward the peephole, dread creeping over me like ice. I pressed my eye against the glass. This time, someone was there. A figure stood at the edge of the porch, just outside the reach of the light. They were tall, dressed in dark clothing, their face hidden by the hood of a thick winter coat. My blood ran cold. My grip tightened around my phone. The person didn't move, didn't knock, didn't ring the bell again. They just stood there, watching. I backed away from the door, my heartbeat hammering in my chest. My fingers fumbled over my phone screen as I quickly typed back. "Me. Who are you?" No response. I swallowed hard, trying to think. Should I call the police? Should I turn off the lights and pretend I wasn't home? Then another text came. Unknown number. "You forgot to lock the back door." My breath hitched. Number. I had locked it. I knew I had locked it, but my legs were already moving but could think. I sprinted through the kitchen, my socked feet sliding across the hardwood floor. The back door was open. A gust of freezing wind swept through the house, carrying in the scent of snow and something else, something rotten. I slammed the door shut, locked it, then pressed my back against it, my whole body shaking. My mind raced. Had the wind blown it open, or had someone come inside? A noise from upstairs made my blood turn to ice. A slow, deliberate creak, like a footstep. I wasn't alone. The realization sent a fresh wave of terror through me. My phone buzzed again, and I almost dropped it. Unknown number. "I'm upstairs!" I choked on a gasp. My limbs felt frozen, my thoughts spinning. I had to get out. I had to run, but my legs refused to move. Then, another creak, closer this time. Something was moving in the hallway above me. My survival instincts finally kicked in. I bolted for the front door, yanking it open so hard it nearly tore off the hinges. I ran barefoot into the snow, the cold biting at my skin, but I didn't care. My only thought was getting away. I made it to the neighbor's house, pounding on their door until they answered. The moment I stepped inside, my body collapsed from exhaustion, and I could barely get the words out between gasping breaths. They called the police. When the officers searched my house, they found footprints in the snow. They led from the front porch around to the back door, and then stopped inside the house. But they never found anyone. The only thing they discovered was my bedroom closet, slightly ajar, with deep scratch marks along the inside of the door, as if someone had been hiding there for hours. I never believed in the supernatural. Ghost stories, urban legends, all of that. It never scared me. But what happened that winter night changed my mind forever. I was 19, living alone in a small rental house on the edge of town. The place wasn't much, but it was quiet, and I liked my solitude. Snow had been falling steadily all day, coating the streets in a thick, unbroken blanket. By the time night rolled around, the world outside felt dead, muffled by the storm. I had just settled into bed when I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. It was faint, barely audible over the wind. At first, I thought it was the old pipes knocking. The house had plenty of quirks. Strange noises were nothing new. Then I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. This time, I realized it was coming from the window. I turned onto my side, staring toward the bedroom window across the room. The curtains were drawn, but beyond them, the storm raged on. I hesitated. It's just ice falling from the roof, I told myself. Then, tap, tap, tap. 3 deliberate knocks, slow, measured. Someone was outside. I sat up, my pulse quickening. Who would be knocking on my window in the middle of a snowstorm? My mind raced through possibilities. Maybe a lost driver? A neighbor needing help? I threw off the blankets and crept toward the window. With a deep breath, I pulled the curtain back just enough to peek outside. Nothing. Just an expanse of untouched snow, stretching out toward the dark woods beyond the backyard. No footprints, no signs of movement. I frowned. Had I imagined it? As I turned away, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text message. Unknown number. Why didn't you open the window? I froze. My breath caught in my throat as I read the words over and over. A heavy chill that had nothing to do with the winter air settled in my chest. My hands trembled as I typed back. Me. Who is this? 3 dots appeared. They were typing. Then another message. Unknown number. Look again. My stomach twisted. I didn't want to. Every instinct in me screamed not to, but I did. I turned slowly, my skin prickling as I reached for the curtain again. I pulled it back, and my heart stopped. A face was pressed against the glass, pale, smiling. Its eyes were wide, dark pits, too large for its face. I stumbled backward, knocking over the lamp. The room plunged into darkness, but I didn't care. My hands fumbled for my phone, but my fingers were shaking too hard to type. I scrambled toward the bedroom door, desperate to get out. Then, from the window, tap, tap, tap. I ran. I didn't stop until I was in my car, engine roaring to life, snow spraying as I sped away. I never went back. When I sent my landlord to collect my things, he called me, confused. The snow's untouched, he said. No footprints anywhere near your window. I didn't respond. I already knew what he was going to say. There had never been anyone outside. It was the winter of my senior year, and my parents had left for the weekend to visit family. I didn't mind being home alone. The snowstorm outside was relentless, but I had locked the doors, turned up the heat, and settled in for a quiet night. Around 11:30 p.m., I was scrolling through my phone when I heard it, a knock at the front door. It was slow, deliberate. I hesitated. No one should have been outside in this weather. My stomach tightened as I got up and moved cautiously toward the door. I checked the peephole. No one was there. I exhaled, shaking my head. Maybe the wind knocked something loose. I turned away, and the knock came again, louder. My pulse spiked. I flicked on the porch light and took another look. Still, no one. That's when my phone buzzed. A new text message, unknown number. Why aren't you answering? A chill ran through me. My hands felt numb as I typed back. Me. Who is this? The response was immediate. Unknown number. Let me in. I felt sick. My mind raced. Was someone playing a prank? Had a stranger followed me home? I double-checked the locks and backed away from the house felt eerily silent, except for the howling wind outside. Then, another text. Unknown. Number. I'm already inside. The air left my lungs. I barely had time to react before I heard something upstairs. A slow, dragging sound, like footsteps. I turned toward the staircase, my body frozen in fear. The sound came, a deliberate creak of the floorboard. I wasn't alone. I grabbed the nearest thing I could use as a weapon, a fireplace poker, then moved as quietly as I could toward the front door. I didn't care if the storm was raging outside. I needed to get out. I reached for the lock, and then my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Don't run. I ignored it. My hands fumbled with the lock, yanking the door open. The freezing wind hit me like a wall, but I didn't care. I ran. I sprinted through the snow, slipping and stumbling, until I reached my neighbor's house. I pounded on their door until they let me in, breathless and shaking. When the police arrived, they searched my house. No signs of forced entry, no footprints in the snow, nothing missing. But in my room, the closet door was slightly open, and on the inside, scratched deep into the wood, was my name. I never liked winter nights. There was something about the way the snow silenced everything that made me uneasy, like the world outside had been swallowed up, leaving me completely alone. That night, I truly was alone. My parents were out of town, and the snowstorm had trapped me inside. The power had flickered a few times, but I wasn't too worried. I had a blanket, a cup of hot chocolate, and my phone. I figured I'd just wait out the storm. Then, At exactly 12:03 a.m., I heard it. A soft, rhythmic scratching sound. At first, I thought it was just a tree branch scraping against the house. But then I realized it was coming from inside. I muted the TV and strained my ears. The sound was faint, almost hesitant, like someone tracing their fingernails along the walls. I swallowed hard and stood up, my heart already pounding. I moved slowly through the house, listening. The sound was coming from the hallway. I reached for the light switch, flicked it on, nothing. The hallway was empty. I let out a shaky breath. Maybe the old heating system just making the walls creak. Then I saw it, a single wet footprint, right in the middle of the hallway floor. My stomach twisted. The footprint was small, childlike, barefoot. I took a step back, gripping my phone tightly. My brain struggled for a logical explanation. I had locked the doors. The windows were shut. There was no way. My phone buzzed in my hand. A new message. Unknown. Number. Why won't you come find me? I felt lightheaded. My fingers trembled as I typed back. Me. Who is this? The reply came instantly. Unknown number. You used to play with me, don't you remember? I could barely breathe. My mind raced back to childhood, trying to grasp any memory that would make sense of this. Then, another text. Unknown number. I'm in your room. The blood in my veins turned to ice. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to move. But I had to. With slow, shaky steps, I crept toward my bedroom door. It was open just a crack. I pushed it open wider, and every muscle in my body locked up. There, standing in the dim glow of my bedside lamp, was a little girl. She was barefoot, her nightgown tattered and soaked, as if she had been walking through the snow. Her skin was pale, too pale, and when she turned to look at me, her eyes were completely black. I gasped and stumbled backward, but in the blink of an eye, she was gone. The room was empty. My phone buzzed one last time. Unknown number. You left me in the snow. I don't know how I made it through the rest of the night. I locked myself in the bathroom, too afraid to move, too terrified to sleep. The next morning, I called my parents and begged them to come home. I never got another message, but sometimes, in the dead of winter, I still hear the sound of tiny, wet footprints moving through the hall. I was 17 when it happened. My parents had gone on a weekend trip, leaving me alone in the house. I didn't mind. It wasn't the first time. I had the whole place to myself, plenty of food and a snowstorm outside that made the world feel quiet and safe. At least, I thought I was safe. The first strange thing happened around midnight. I was in my room, scrolling through my phone, when I heard a soft knock, not at the front door, not at a window. It came from inside the house. I sat up, my heart hammering. I muted my phone and listened. Silence. Maybe I imagined it? The house made weird noises sometimes, wood settling, pipes shifting. That's all it was. I forced myself to relax, but then knock, knock, knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks from the basement door. A cold shiver ran through me. Our basement was unfinished, just a dark, cold space we barely used. I never went down there. So who or what was knocking from the inside? I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. Slowly, I crept out of my room, down the hall, and toward the kitchen, where the basement door stood. The air felt heavy, thick with something I couldn't explain. I hesitated before reaching for the doorknob. I knew I shouldn't open it. Every instinct screamed at me to leave it alone. But I had to. I took a deep breath, gripped the handle, and yanked the door open. My flashlight beam cut into the darkness. The old wooden stairs disappeared into blackness below. Nothing moved. I exhaled shakily, feeling foolish. It was probably just the wind messing with the door. Yeah, that had to be it. I was about to close the door when my phone buzzed in my hand. A new message. Unknown number. Why did you open the door? I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. My fingers went numb. I swallowed hard and typed back. Me. Who is this? No reply. Then, from the basement, a whisper. Low. Raspy. Come down. I slammed the door shut and locked it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. I backed away, heart pounding, trying to convince myself I was imagining. Then, a creak from the basement stairs, like something was coming up. I ran to my room, locked the door, and hid under the covers like a child. I barely slept, every sound making me jump. When morning came, I crept back to the basement door. It was wide open. I never stayed home alone again. I grew up in a quiet neighborhood, the kind where nothing ever happened. My parents were out of town for the week, leaving me alone in the house. I had done this plenty of times before, so I wasn't nervous, at least not at first. That night, the snowstorm was relentless, covering everything in a thick white silence. I made some hot chocolate, curled up on the couch, and put on a movie. Everything was fine. Until the doorbell rang. I frowned. It was almost midnight. Who would be out in this? I hesitated before getting up. I checked my phone. No missed calls or messages. If someone I knew was coming over, they would have told me. I crept to the front door and looked through the peephole. No one was there. A cold unease settled in my chest. Maybe the wind had triggered it somehow. Maybe snow had piled up and shifted against the bell. That had to be it. Then, ding dong, louder this time. I felt my stomach twist. I reached for the light switch and flicked on the porch light. Still, no one. The snow outside was untouched. No footprints, no tire tracks. I took a step back, heart pounding. I double-checked the locks, made sure the deadbolt was secure, and returned to the couch. I tried to focus on the movie, but my mind wouldn't let go of that nagging sense of dread. Something wasn't right. Then, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Why won't you open the door? I felt my blood turn to ice. My hands trembled as I typed back. Me. Who is this? No response. Then, knock, knock, knock. This time, at the back door. I jumped up, heart hammering in my chest. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to know. But I had to. I crept toward the sliding glass door that led to the backyard. The porch light outside flickered against the snow, and there, pressed against the glass, was a handprint. My breath hitched. The print was too large to be human. Then, slowly, something moved just beyond the light. A shadow. Tall. Too tall. The figure had long, twisted limbs and a head that was wrong. Too elongated, too unnatural. It stood just at the edge of the light, staring at me, watching. I scrambled backward, grabbing my phone. My hands shook as I dialed 911. The dispatcher picked up, but before I could speak, a new message. Unknown number. I see you. I dropped the phone. My whole body was shaking. Then, the porch light went out. I don't remember much after that. Just the sound of something tapping on the glass as I ran upstairs and locked myself in my room. The police arrived 20 minutes later. They found nothing. No footprints, no handprints, no sign that anyone had been there at all. But I know what I saw. And sometimes, late at night, when the snow falls heavy and silent, I hear the doorbell ring. It was a bitterly cold winter night, and I was home alone for the weekend. My parents had gone to visit my aunt, but a nasty snowstorm had rolled in, forcing them to stay an extra night. I didn't mind. I had the house to myself, plenty of food, and a warm blanket. By midnight, the world outside was completely silent. The snowfall was thick, and the wind had died down, leaving everything eerily still. I was in my room, mindlessly scrolling through my phone when I heard it, a soft thump. At first, I ignored it. Houses make noises, especially old ones. But then it happened again. Thump, thump. It sounded like it was coming from the roof. I hesitated, trying to convince myself it was just snow sliding, but something about the sound felt deliberate, like footsteps. I turned off my phone's screen, my reflection staring back at me in the darkened glass. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach twist into knots, a shape, in the reflection just outside my window. I spun around, my heart hammering. There was nothing there, but I knew I had seen something, a shadow, a figure. Something had been watching. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just my imagination. I pulled the covers up and turned off the lights, forcing myself to sleep. Then, thump, thump, thump. This time it was closer. It wasn't on the roof anymore. It was right above my room. A chill ran through me. I lay frozen in bed, every muscle locked in fear. The sound moved, slow and heavy, pacing back and forth. Then it stopped. I held my breath, listening. Silence. I told myself it was over. Maybe it had been an animal, and it had finally left. I almost believed that, until I heard my closet door creak open. A rush of panic hit me. My body refused to move. Something was in my room. I reached for my phone with trembling fingers, turned on the flashlight, and pointed it toward the closet. The door was slightly ajar. The darkness inside felt deeper than it should have been. I couldn't see anything at first, but then a hand, pale, long fingers, stretched too far, clutching the doorframe. I didn't think. I bolted. I ran out of my room, down the stairs, and out the front door into the freezing snow. My feet were bare, the cold biting into my skin, but I didn't stop. I didn't stop until I reached my neighbor's house and pounded on their door like my life depended on it. They let me in, confused and alarmed. I couldn't even explain what had happened. I just begged them to let me stay until my parents came. When my dad checked the house the next morning, nothing was out of place. The closet door was shut. The snow on the roof was undisturbed. But I know what I saw. And every winter, when the snow falls heavy and the world goes silent, I still hear the thump. I always hated how quiet my house got during winter nights. The heavy snowfall seemed to muffle all sound, making everything feel too still, too empty. My parents had left for a business trip, leaving me alone for the weekend. I didn't think much of it at first. I had done this before. The first night was normal. I stayed up watching TV, the glow from the screen making the darkness outside feel less intimidating. But just as I was about to go to bed, something strange happened. A single knock, not at the front door, not at a window. It came from inside the house. I froze. My breath caught in my throat as I listened. Maybe I imagined it. Then, a soft whisper followed, too faint to understand. I slowly stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. The sound had come from down the hall, near my parents' bedroom. I reached for my phone, turned on the flashlight, and took slow, careful steps toward their room. The door was open just a crack, revealing only darkness inside. I hesitated, then pushed it open. The room was empty. Everything looked normal, except for one thing. Their closet door was wide open. I knew for a fact that it had been shut earlier. I swallowed hard, my fingers tightening around my phone. I stepped closer, shining the light into the closet. There was nothing there, just empty space. I exhaled shakily, convincing myself that maybe the door hadn't been fully closed before. Maybe a draft had pushed it open. I shut the closet door firmly and backed away, but as I turned to leave, something whispered my name, right behind me. I spun around, my flashlight shaking in my grip. The closet door was still shut. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I tried to put it out of my mind. Maybe I had been overtired, my brain playing tricks on me. The house was old. It made noises. But by nightfall, the unease returned, and at exactly 3:15 a.m., I woke up to the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps outside my bedroom door. I held my breath, too scared to move. The footsteps stopped right in front of my door. Then, tap, tap, tap. Something scratched against the wood. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't even blink. I just stared at the door, my heart thudding so hard it hurt. Then, after what felt like an eternity, silence. I stayed frozen, waiting, and then phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. Don't open the closet. I nearly dropped my mouth went. I didn't respond. I didn't move. The rest of the night was a blur of terror. Somehow I managed to stay awake until morning. As soon as the sun came up, I packed a bag and left to stay with a friend. I never told my parents what happened, but even now when I'm alone at night, I never sleep with the closet door open, and I always check my phone, because sometimes when the snow falls heavy and the world is quiet, I still get those messages. I never liked winter night. The silence that came with heavy snowfall made everything feel unnatural, like the world had been smothered under a thick white blanket, hiding something under. That night, I was home alone. My parents had gone to visit my grandmother, planning to stay the night because of the worsening snowstorm. I was 17, old enough to handle myself, but something about the night felt wrong. It started with the lights. Around midnight, I was in the living room watching a movie when the lights flickered. At first, I thought it was just the storm, but then they went out completely. The TV screen cut to black, and I was left sitting in total darkness. The power had never gone out in our house before. Not like this. I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight. The dim beam barely lit up the room, casting long, stretching shadows against the walls. Then, a sound. A low creak. It came from upstairs. I froze, my pulse hammering in my ears. The house was old, sure, but that wasn't just the house settling. That was a footstep. Someone was inside. Slowly, carefully, I stood up. I didn't make a sound as I moved toward the staircase, aiming my phone's flashlight up the steps. I whispered, "Hello?" No answer. Then, another creak. This time, closer. My stomach dropped. I wanted to run, to bolt out the front door into the freezing snow, but something in me needed to know what was up there. I climbed the stairs, my breath shallow. The air felt heavier with each step. My parents' bedroom door was slightly open, darkness spilling from inside. I reached for the door, barely nudging it open, and my phone vibrated in my hand. A text message. Unknown. Number. "Why are you coming upstairs?" I felt my throat tighten. My fingers trembled as I typed back. Me. "Who is this?" No response. Then, inside my parents' room, a whisper. Software. Almost playful. "Come see." I turned and ran. I sprinted down the stairs, my socks sliding on the wooden floor. I didn't care. I just needed to get out. I grabbed my coat, shoved my feet into my boots without tying them, and bolted into the snow. The freezing air burned my lungs, but I didn't stop running until I reached my neighbor's house. I banged on the door like my life depended on it. When they let me in, I could barely explain what had happened. The next morning, my dad went back with me to check the house. Everything was normal. Nothing was out of place, except for one thing. On my parents' bed, in the center of their neatly folded blanket, was my phone. I know I had taken it with me when I ran, and on the screen was one final message. Unknown number. You shouldn't have left. Winter nights always felt different, quieter, heavier, like something was watching from just beyond the snowfall. That night, I was home alone, left to watch the house, while my parents attended a family wedding. They'd be gone all weekend. I didn't mind at first, until the knocking started. At exactly 2:37 a.m., a sharp, deliberate knock echoed through the house. Not from the front door, not from a window. It came from inside. I sat up in bed, my body rigid. The knock had come from downstairs. 3 steady raps against wood, like someone inside the house wanted my attention. I reached for my phone, debating whether to call my parents, but stopped myself. Maybe I had imagined it. Then, another knock, this time closer. I swallowed hard. My heart pounded in my ears as I slowly climbed out of bed, grabbing the heaviest object I could find, a metal flashlight. I edged toward my bedroom door, listening, silent. I exhaled, convincing myself it had been the wind or the house settling. But just as I turned to go back to bed, knock, 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 directly outside my door. I couldn't breathe. My fingers gripped the flashlight so tightly they ached. I didn't move. The air felt wrong, like something was waiting for me to react. And then, the doorknob turned, slow, deliberate, testing. I yanked my phone from my pocket and turned on the flashlight, aiming it at the door. The knob twisted halfway, then stopped. Silence. I didn't dare move. Minutes passed, but it felt like an eternity. And then, from the other side of the door, a whisper, too soft to understand. I snapped. I bolted toward my window, fumbling with the lock, ready to jump if I had to, but before I could open it, my phone buzzed in my hand. A text message. Unknown. Number. Don't open the door. My stomach twisted into knots. My hands shook as I typed back. Me. Who are you? No response. And then, something new. Scratching. Low, slow, clawing sounds against my bedroom door. Not knocking this time. I lost it. I grabbed my keys, yanked the window open, and climbed onto the roof. The cold wind burned my skin, but I didn't care. I slid down onto the porch and sprinted across the frozen driveway, not stopping until I reached my neighbor's house. I stayed there until morning. When my dad came home later that day, we checked the house. Every door was locked. Every window was shut. Nothing was out of place, except for one thing. A message scrawled onto my bedroom door in something dark and sticky. You listened. I never minded being home alone. In fact, I usually enjoyed it. The quiet, the freedom, the chance to do whatever I wanted without anyone hovering over me. But something about that particular winter night felt off. Maybe it was the way the wind howled against the house, or how the snow piled up unnaturally fast, swallowing the world outside. Maybe it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. It started around midnight. I was curled up on the couch, scrolling through my phone, when I heard it. A creak, not from the house settling, from the hallway that led to my bedroom. I froze, my fingers tightening around my phone. The sound was subtle, too subtle, like someone was trying to move quietly, but hadn't accounted for the old wooden floors. I turned off my phone's screen, plunging the room into near darkness. The only light came from the dim glow of the street lamp outside. Then, another creak, closer this time. I sat there, my breath caught in my throat. I wasn't alone. I forced myself to breathe, to think. My first instinct was to grab a kitchen knife, but that meant moving, making noise. Instead, I reached for my phone again, my fingers shaking as I typed a message to my mom, me. Hey, is anyone supposed to be home? I hit send, no response. Then, a soft knock from the hallway. 3 slow taps against the wall. I wanted to run, I wanted to scream, but all I could do was sit there, paralyzed, waiting. Then my phone buzzed. I nearly dropped it in panic before I saw the screen. Mom, we're still out of town. Why? A lump formed in my throat. Me. I think someone's in the house. I hovered over the send button, but before I could press it, a new message appeared. Unknown number. Don't move. It will hear you. My stomach twisted into knots. My breathing turned shallow. Slowly, too slowly, I lifted my gaze toward the hallway. A shadow stood there, tall, unmoving, watching. It wasn't my parents. It wasn't a burglar. It was something else. I choked down a scream. The figure didn't move at first. It just stood there, its shape barely distinguishable in the darkness. But then, as if knowing I'd finally seen it, it took one step forward, then another. The floor didn't creak. It was silent now, too silent. I bolted. I didn't care how much noise I made. I grabbed my keys, ran to the front door, and yanked it open. The freezing air hit me like a wall, but I didn't stop. I sprinted down the driveway, slipping on the ice, barely catching myself before I could fall. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see if it was following me. I pounded on my neighbor's door until they let me in. The next morning, when I went back with my dad, the house was exactly how I left it, except for one thing. My bedroom door, which I had left wide open, was now shut, and carved into the wood, in jagged, uneven letters, was a single word: run. Winter nights had always felt peaceful to me, cold, quiet, and still, but that night, the silence felt wrong, like something was lurking just beyond it, waiting. I was home alone, snowed in while my parents were away on a business trip. The storm outside had been relentless, piling snow against the windows and cutting me off from the rest of the world. I didn't mind. I had my blankets, my phone, and enough snacks to last until morning. But then at 1:12 a.m., the doorbell rang. I froze. Nobody should have been out in this storm. The roads were buried, and even the plows had stopped running hours ago. The doorbell rang again. I hesitated, my breath caught in my throat. Slowly, I crept toward the front door, my socks silent against the wooden floor. I peered through the peephole, expecting to see nothing. Instead, I saw a man. He stood perfectly still on my snow-covered porch. His head was tilted downward, hiding his face beneath the hood of a heavy winter coat. He wasn't shivering. He wasn't moving at all. I didn't open the door. I reached for my phone, ready to call someone, anyone. But before I could unlock it, the man tilted his head upward, and I saw his face. Or rather, I didn't. There was nothing under that hood. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just smooth, pale skin, stretched where a face should have been. I stumbled backward, choking on my own breath. Then, from the other side of the door, knock, 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 slow, deliberate. I clamped a hand over my mouth, willing myself not to make a sound. My mind screamed at me to run, to hide, to do something, anything. Then my phone buzzed. I flinched, barely keeping myself from screaming. My hands shook as I raised the screen. Unknown number. Let me in. I dropped the phone. Knock, knock, knock. Louder this time. I ran. I bolted toward my room, locking the door behind me. My breath came in short gasps as I pressed my back against the wall, heart hammering. Then the sound changed. The knocking wasn't at the front door anymore. It was outside my window. I turned, dread pooling in my stomach. There, through the frost-covered glass, the man stood on the second floor. His faceless head was pressed against the window pane, as if staring directly at me. I couldn't move, couldn't think. Then, the glass cracked. A long, jagged line splintered across the window, and that was enough. I grabbed my blankets, dove under my bed, and squeezed my eyes shut. I stayed there, shaking, waiting for the glass to shatter. But it never did. At some point, exhaustion took over. When I woke up, daylight streamed through the curtains. I crawled out from under the bed, my body sore and stiff. The window was intact. The snow outside was undisturbed. But as I picked up my phone from the floor, I saw one final message. Unknown number. See you next time. I always loved winter. The way the snow muffled sound, the way the cold air felt crisp against my skin. But that night, as I sat alone in my house, watching the snow fall outside, I realized something. The silence felt unnatural. It wasn't peaceful. It was empty. At first, I tried to ignore it. I wrapped myself in a blanket, scrolled through my phone, and turned up the volume on the TV. But no matter how much noise I made, the silence still pressed in around me. Then, a soft creak from upstairs. I went still. My parents were out of town. No one else was supposed to be here. I muted the TV and strained to listen. Silence. Maybe I had imagined it. I turned the volume back up. Then, another creak. My stomach twisted. This time, it was louder, closer. I grabbed my phone, flipped on the flashlight, and forced myself to stand. Slowly, I crept toward the staircase, each step feeling heavier than the last. I didn't call out. Something in me knew that was a bad idea. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I hesitated. The upstairs hallway stretched out in front of me, shrouded in darkness. My bedroom door was open just as I had left it. Then I saw it. The attic door was open, just a crack, but enough to see the black void beyond it. I felt sick. I never went into the attic. My parents never went into the attic. There was no reason for it to be open. My fingers trembled as I opened my phone's dial pad, ready to call the police. Then my phone buzzed. A text message. Unknown number. Don't look up. I swallowed hard, my pulse pounding. I didn't want to look. I didn't. But I did, and I saw it. A hand, thin, pale. Too many fingers. It gripped the edge of the attic door, inching it open wider. I staggered backward, my breath caught in my throat. The hand twitched as if it knew I had seen it. Then, a second hand appeared, and then, a face, or something like a face. Eyes too large, a mouth too wide, a grin that stretched in a way that no human mouth should. I ran. I didn't care how loud I was. I sprinted back downstairs, grabbed my keys, and threw open the front door. The cold air burned my lungs, but I didn't stop running until I reached my neighbor's house. When the police arrived, they found nothing. The attic door was closed. There were no signs of forced entry, but I know what I saw. And when I got back home, I noticed something I hadn't before. Scratched into the wood above my bedroom door were 3 words. I live here. Winter nights had always brought a certain kind of loneliness, but I never truly feared being alone until that night. The storm had rolled in faster than expected, trapping me in my house under thick layers of snow. My parents were out of town, and the roads were impossible to drive on. It was just me, the howling wind and the bitter cold pressing against the walls. At 2:13 a.m., the power went out. The house sank into complete darkness, the only light coming from the faint glow of the snow outside. I grabbed my phone, but before I could turn on the flashlight, knock, knock, knock. Someone was at the front door. I froze. Who would be out in this storm? Slowly, I crept to the peephole. A man stood on the porch, shoulders hunched, arms hanging limply at his sides. His face was pale, nearly blending into the snow swirling around him. He wasn't wearing a coat, just a thin sweater, completely wrong for this kind of weather. I didn't open the door. I didn't even move. Then, as if he could sense me standing there, he looked up, and I stopped breathing. His eyes were wrong. They weren't eyes at all, just two black gaping holes like something had hollowed him out from the inside. Then, his mouth stretched into a grin. Knock, 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 louder this time. More urgent. I stumbled back, gripping my phone with sweaty hands. I didn't care if the power was out. I was calling the police. But before I could dial, my phone buzzed. A text message. Unknown number. Don't let him in. I swallowed hard, my fingers shaking as I typed back. Me. Who is this? No response. The knocking stopped. A cold dread seeped into my bones. I didn't want to look, but I forced myself to inch toward the peephole again. The man was gone. Only an expanse of untouched snow lay beyond the porch. No footprints, no sign that anyone had ever been there. But as I turned, my stomach dropped. The back door was unlocked, and it was slightly open. The last thing I saw before the lights flickered back on was a set of wet, bare footprints leading inside. Winter nights had always felt safe to me. The snow blanketed the world in silence, and the cold kept people inside. But that night, as I sat alone in my house, I realized something. Silence doesn't always mean safety. It started with a sound, a soft tapping. At first, I thought it was the wind knocking a branch against the window. But as I sat there, curled up on the couch, I noticed something strange. The tapping was rhythmic, deliberate, like someone was knocking from the inside. I slowly turned my head toward the window. At first, I didn't see anything, just the reflection of the dim living room lights against the glass, the snow swirling outside. Then, something moved. My breath hitched. A shadowy figure stood just beyond the window, not outside, inside. The shape was tall and thin, its body blending into the darkness, but its hand was pressed against the glass, long fingers tapping in slow, steady beats. Tap, tap, tap. I couldn't move, I couldn't scream. Then, as if sensing my fear, the figure's head twitched, and I saw its face, or rather, I didn't. There was nothing. No eyes, no mouth, just smooth, featureless skin. I bolted. I ran upstairs, slammed my bedroom door shut, and locked it. My heart pounded in my ears as I pressed my back against the door, my hands trembling. Then, tap, tap, tap. I turned slowly, dread pooling in my stomach. The sound was coming from my bedroom window. I forced myself to look, and there it was, standing outside. But I was on the second floor. It shouldn't have been possible. Yet, it stood there, pressed against the glass, its head tilted in that unnatural way. Then, with slow, deliberate movement, it raised its hand, and it began to trace letters onto the fogged-up glass. Let me in. I squeezed my eyes shut, refusing to look. When I opened them again, it was gone. The rest of the night passed in terrified silence. I never heard it leave. But in the morning, as I hesitantly approached the window, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Pressed into the frost-covered glass were the clear imprints of two hands. They were on the inside. Winter had always been my favorite season. There was something about the way the snow silenced the world, muffling everything into a peaceful stillness. But after that night, I would never feel safe in the silence again. It was the last night I would be home alone. My parents had been snowed in at a hotel 2 towns over, and the storm had made it impossible for anyone to reach me. I wasn't scared. I had the heater running, a stack of blankets, and my phone fully charged. Then, at 3:14 a.m., I woke up. Something was wrong. I didn't know what had disturbed me at first. The house was quiet. The only sound was the wind outside howling through the trees. But as I lay there, forcing my breathing to slow, I realized I wasn't alone. I couldn't explain how I knew. It wasn't a sound, a shadow, or anything obvious. It was just an overwhelming feeling, like something unseen was watching me, waiting. Then, a soft creak. It came from the hallway, just outside my bedroom door. I froze. My bedroom door was locked. But somehow, that didn't comfort me. Another creak. Then, the sound of slow, shuffling footsteps. I reached for my phone, my hands trembling. I turned on the flashlight and pointed it toward the door. The gap beneath it was pitch black. No light from the hallway, just darkness. Then I saw it. A shadow moved under the door. Not the shadow of a person, but something wrong. Too thin, too long, moving too slowly. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to scream, to hide, to do anything, but I couldn't move. Then, the doorknob turned. I nearly dropped my phone. The knob rattled violently like something was trying to get in. I scrambled back, pressing myself against the headboard. My chest felt tight, my vision blurry. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the rattling stopped, silent. I sat there for what felt like hours, too terrified to move. When the first light of dawn finally crept through my window, I forced myself out of bed. My body was sore, my mind numb with exhaustion. But when I finally unlocked the door, my stomach dropped. There were scratches on the outside of the door. deep, jagged marks that trailed all the way down the hallway, and in the middle of the floor, directly in front of my door, was a single word, scrawled into the wood in bloody, shaky letters: tonight.